the high officials scratched each other's backs. Lowest point when Enrile was, I have to be very frank, when Enrile was released by the Supreme Court on a ground he did not even invoke. I had always steeled myself to be honest. I had always steeled myself to not to entertain corrupt moves, like someone asking the status of a certain case and then whispering to me, meron tayo dyan commission. As far as I'm concerned, you cannot eradicate it overnight. Culture has been there, and it would take strong and honest and men with integrity to continue the fight against corruption.
One of the toughest positions to have in a country where corruption is endemic is to be in charge of rooting it out. Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa, and we're sitting with the woman in charge of doing exactly that in the Philippines, the Ombudsman Conchita Carpio-Morales. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you to Maria for inviting me.
How would you define where corruption is today in the Philippines?
I'd like to believe that we have made a tad of a difference in trying to counteract corruption, in other words, to control it, but we are still saddled with a lot of cases, past cases, incoming cases, which show that corruption really has become endemic. So we're trying our best to see to it that we control, because it's difficult to eradicate at this point in time, corruption. I retired at 70, and as I have always said, I would have wanted to embrace the luxury of retirement. But I was offered to become ombudsman, and while I was ambivalent at first, I was eventually convinced to take the position. There's a lot of corruption in the government. So that's the challenge we are facing. We want to minimize the incidence of corruption.
How would you describe the way things work?
Well, you see, if there is a lot of opportunities for people to commit corruption and there is no monitoring of the actions of people, then the corruption will go on. And there's a lot of opportunities for them to cheat and to steal money, and there are no watchdogs, then corruption will go on.
Can I ask you your high point and your low point? The high point, so you've been in office 4.5 years, the high point, the best moment as ombudsman?
The best when our positions are upheld.
Yeah. One moment that is the happiest while you were at this position for you.
One moment? There are so many moments.
Okay.
But when the demurrer to evidence of who was it who filed the demurrer to evidence? GMA was denied by the Sandigan. Of course, that to me is a feather to the cap of the office of the Ombudsman.
Right. And low point? Where is the
low point?
Lowest point?
Lowest point when Enrile was, I have to be very frank, when Enrile was released by the Supreme Court on a ground he did not even invoke. We certainly opposed. We filed a motion for reconsideration, and it's still pending. We believe that our position is very strong, in the same manner that the position of Enrile is that they feel that his position is very strong. So the case is now with the Supreme Court, and we are awaiting the resolution of the court, whether to affirm its release of Enrile or to reverse its decision and recall him back to jail.
I was curious to hear how you felt.
As an ombudsman, of course, I was frustrated because if I recall correctly, his being ill or sick was never raised as a ground for petition for bail at the lower court. When I say lower court, I refer to the Sandigan Bayan. It was only, I think, when he wanted to be detained at the hospital that he raised his being ill or sick
Yes.
to justify detention at the hospital.
Doesn't it set a dangerous precedent? Were you surprised by this?
I was surprised, but whether it can be presented as a dangerous precedent or not, I'm not going to comment on that without risk of being cited in contempt by the Supreme Court.
The challenges of doing these types of cases, what do you face in having to deal with them and the prosecutors?
Well, we're very confident because the prosecutors prosecute in earnest. We have strong evidence. So we are confident that though it might be delayed, we will eventually prevail.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is what pressures do you and your office come under in a country where moving behind the scenes or
Fortunately,
familiar?
no pressure reaches me. Not at all.
You keep yourself.
The only pressure we have is pressure of work.
Could you describe it for someone who doesn't understand the way politics and power works in the Philippines?
Well, I am told that there's a lot of backroom channels that people go to this and to that, I am told, so that's hearsay.
Yes.
All right. But if I recall, Commissioner Colaiko, I think, he was one of the commissioners in the drafting of the 1987 Constitution. He said that the reason why they came up with the Office of the Ombudsman is that they wanted an office that is isolated from the tentacles of power, tentacles of politicians, tentacles of, fixers who reach out to courts and to prosecutors.
Right.
So that was the rationale, according to him,
Right.
behind the creation of an independent office, the Ombudsman.
Do you see this working better now?
Well, as far as my experience in my stint here is concerned, yes, it is working.
Let's go back to what endemic corruption means. Why is it endemic in this country? From your perspective, why has it grown to these?
Well, I always say leadership by example. If the leaders are corrupt, what will prevent from the underlings from committing corruption? You give them a field, yung tinatawag nila na greener pasture, where there's more opportunities for corruption. If they remain undetected or uncontrolled or they are not checked at all, then they would be at liberty to commit corruption. But again, if the leader is not corrupt, the subordinate officials would have difficulty or would fear committing corruption. It has become a culture. You see sometimes when you're in the government and you're a government official, there's this expectation that you'll have big mansions, you'll have flashy cars.
Is there a culture change?
Well, as far as corruption is concerned, I see there's a culture change. The culture of integrity seems to have escalated, has to have been enhanced.
Are we catching enough of the people who are taking advantage to be able to make a dent?
We are catching in the sense that they are being indicted. But you see, the cases that we inherited date back as early as 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and some.
So people get away with it, that's why it
They
continues.
do, yes. But they can get away with it in the sense that if they are not discovered, then goodbye. But if they do, they'll have to face the law.
Has anyone?
If there's enough evidence to hail them. But if not, because sometimes you may be guilty. You know that person is guilty, but the evidence does not show. And even you are aware that he is guilty, but you have to go by the evidence. If the evidence does not surface that he is guilty, then you have no choice but to dismiss the case.
One of the things that shocked the Filipinos in 2013 was the Priority Development Assistance Fund. How did that go undetected for as long as it did?
Well, the high officials scratched each other's backs. See? Because that was already a series of acts of congressmen and senators.
Right.
And it was all manipulated by a certain group. And perhaps some naive congressman or senator were caught in the trap. And that's why they were all victims, and perhaps not only victims, they were also conspirators. I'm sure they were aware of what they were entering into.
But as long as it was hidden, it was okay because everybody was
Yes,
doing
yes.
it.
They thought they would get away with it because there were powerful people who would think that after so many years of being in power, you are caught and you are faced with voluminous evidence,
Yes.
which they find hard to controvert.
Our ratings in Transparency International for
Our
Corruption.
ratings in Transparency International, in fact, I think we were 10 notches lower than last year's, the other years. Well, you see, some people blame us, the Office of the Ombudsman, at the pace ombudsman cases are going. But you see, the Office of the Ombudsman investigates and prosecutes only. In other words, in our investigation, during which we meet a lot of obstacles, we gather evidence. That's the fact-finding stage or case build-up stage. When we file the case in court, our prosecutors prosecute the case, they present the evidence we gathered, and we are not going to file a case if we do not believe that the evidence we gathered is strong. At that point, it is already the court which controls the proceedings. So when the case reaches the court, all the Office of the Ombudsman would do is to prosecute. We no longer have any control of the proceedings. It's now the courts who have control. But our prosecutors see to it that they oppose all moves at delay, all moves at all dilatory against all dilatory tactics of the defense. And you see, the trouble with some cases is that some lawyers bring up so many incidents to the appellate courts. And again, we no longer have any control over the pace of the proceedings in the appellate courts. So usually they blame the ombudsman. They are so impatient. They said, wala naman ako convict, wala naman na bibilanggo. They should not blame me. We only present evidence. It's the courts which determine whether or not the accused is guilty or is acquitted.
In terms of the banks who actually allowed this to happen, do you consider them complicit in PDAF?
We are considering that. But you see, we're having difficulty because of the bank secrecy law.
Correct.
And we cannot force them unless we get a court order. But as far as the ombudsman is concerned, if the case is not, but because that's the law, if the case is not filed in court, we cannot get access to these records of the bank.
What reforms would you want to see happen now to help you do your job better?
To institutionalize the reforms that we have adopted, all right, like seeing to it that the rules and procedures are, well, we're still trying to come up with a revised rules of court.
Yes.
Rules, not rules of court, rules of procedure in the office. We're trying to beef up our preventive approach because the office adopts three-pronged approaches. Not only do we prosecute and therefore punitive, we have promotional approach. We try to sell what is the office doing and what do we want people to do to report, and then we have the promotional and the preventive. We're more concerned with preventive because we always say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we're into that now. We are adopting these three approaches, and we are seeing to it that our promotional approach too is introduced to the people around the country. We have this integrity caravan.
Yes.
We hold fora and workshops and seminars, and we meet with our stakeholders throughout the country to tell them, to inform them of what we are doing, to inform them what they should do to help us carry out our reforms.
I want to go back to something you said, which was twice you mentioned eradicate, but then you backed away from
Yes,
eradicating
yes.
corruption.
I think you cannot, as far as I'm concerned, you cannot eradicate it overnight. You have to have the patience
Yes.
to look at the root of these corruptions, the cure that you are going to apply. Because you see, as I said, the culture has been there, and it would take strong and honest and men with integrity to continue the fight against corruption. Because if we do not fight corruption, we will be widening the gap between the rich and the poor. We will not attain peace, because if there is peace, there's no doubt about stability in the country. But peace can be attained not only when there is war. Peace can be attained when there is present law, order, and justice. Those we have to attain. If not, we can never attain peace.
When you mentioned that...
Of course, I was paraphrasing Einstein.
You don't sound so optimistic about being able to control corruption.
Not,
Am I reading
not
correctly?
presently.
Not presently?
Not presently.
Why?
Because the incidence of corruption is such that you would believe that given the anti-corruption efforts that you have been peddling all these years, there seems to be still occasional
Yes.
instances of corruption. So it would probably take some time before you can fully eradicate corruption.
Okay. Is there a modus operandi, the way corruption happens in society? Did that show us anything that's interesting?
There seems to be a template as far as the PDAF cases are concerned. So that's the modus operandi. Well, I am not talking as a prosecutor, but I'm talking as an investigator.
Right.
See, I'm not prosecuting. I am an investigator. Although the Ombudsman is supposed to be a prosecutor because it has a prosecution arm. As an investigator, I could see that there's this, like the PDAF case, there's this proposal.
Yes.
That you should come up with so much amount to be given to particular beneficiaries.
Right.
But and you are supposed to course it through a government functionary, but instead of coursing it through a government functionary, you course it to a foundation, which is a faux foundation, because it's just invented. The members of the Board of Trustees, or however you call them, are faux or it's the same person. They force the signature of the members. They get so-called members, but they are either fictitious or persons living abroad who are not even aware that their names are being used. So, and then, you know, the documentary part of the work is made, and before you know it, the proceeds of the PDAF would go to the hands of the malefactors and their conspirators.
That money, now that the PDAF has been declared unconstitutional, is there any way that the Filipino people can get that back?
We are supposed to have this a petition for forfeiture, but the trouble is that with all the publicity attendant to the investigations, by the time you are allowed to file the petition for forfeiture,
It's gone.
the coffers are empty. The millions, even billions, are gone because they have been withdrawn by the respondents. So it's frustrating. And then again, there's this law which prohibits the filing of forfeiture, petitions for forfeiture within 1 year before national elections and 3 months before special elections. So now, between now and May, we cannot file petitions for forfeitures. There are so many in line now, but by the time we file it, gone with the wind.
You said you insulate yourself from people trying to influence you or to influence. Running an entire ombudsman's office is difficult. How sure are you that your people are also insulated from these types of influence?
Well, we have our internal affairs board.
Yeah.
We fault people who are alleged to have violated either the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act or other laws.
And
So,
for you though, personally, how do you do that? Because it's very hard when you live in the Philippines and you're friends with people. How do you insulate yourself from?
well, I think I have the reputation that I cannot be influenced into doing this. So they would have second thoughts about approaching me.
Deterrence.
Yes,
One of the
right.
theories. Let's go to, now we're moving into elections. Any word of advice for Filipinos going in? I mean, you talked about the levels of corruption in government, but what do you want people to think about?
I had earlier appealed that they should vote for people with integrity, because I said that if the leader, the highest leader, and the leaders in the local governments are men of integrity, you are assured that more or less they will fight corruption, because corruption erodes the economy. It deters the coming over of investments. It delays or impedes or frustrates the delivery of basic social services. Can you imagine the billions of pesos that the PDAF amount
Yes.
involved? They could have funded hundreds of thousands of schools for children. They would have funded hundreds of thousands for salaries of teachers. They could have funded hundreds of thousands for hospital care,
Yes.
for low-cost houses of policemen and soldiers who brave the atrocities of battles in order to be patriotic to the Philippines. They could have funded so many water systems in barangays. They could have funded so many textbooks, and so on and so on. And look, this PDAF amount went allegedly into the pockets of the malefactors. So, where lies poverty? The poverty is there. It is staring at us because basic services were not delivered to them.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the fight for corruption now in this administration.
Oh yes, that's why
You
well,
accepted it.
the president is really keen on fighting corruption. He has shown that, but again, I'd like to disabuse the impression that I get orders from the president. I can't understand why their mindset is like that, but I don't.
And what should the next president prioritize?
Well, the next president should also prioritize on corruption,
Yeah, agree.
because corruption really saps the economies. It deters the entry of investors. It affects the momentum of progress. We should sustain the momentum of progress. No one can deny that the economic accomplishments during Pinoy's term really became very rosy.
Right? In order to do this battle, to fight corruption, you must draw inner strength from somewhere, because it is endemic, as you pointed out. Where's that from? What gives you the drive to continue chipping away at something that seems so difficult to conquer?
It's perhaps la razón de mi vida, the reason for my life. I was probably born to be of this stuff. I was probably born to detest corruption, to condemn corruption, because I'm not corrupt myself. I could see that corruption is rearing its ugly head, but I hate corruption, and I have vowed that I'll never, ever allow corruption to rule, but here I am trying to chop the ugly head of corruption. Because you see, as you were asking me what drives me, I think it's in my person. I don't know why, but I'm glad that I'm not corrupt.
I have to follow this up, but when you said the lowest moment was when the Supreme Court gave Enrile bail,
yes.
right? When you have these low moments, and every leader has a low moment,
Yes.
right? When you have the low moments and and you're not sure, where do you gain strength from? How do you keep moving forward? And how do you know that what you're doing matters?
Well, I know there's a tomorrow, that things could change because nothing is permanent. So that gives me the impetus to move forward, to move on.
And Ombudsman, you said that this was fighting corruption is baked into you. I mean, what happened in your life that made you so certain this is a battle you're going to...
What happened in my life?
Yeah, I mean, why? So you could have done, you could have focused on a lot of things. Why did corruption become yours to fight?
Even in my stint in the Department of Justice,
Yes.
and in the judiciary, I had always steeled myself to be honest. I had always steeled myself to not to entertain corrupt moves, like someone asking the status of a certain case and then whispering to me, meron tayo dyan commission. So that was when I was with the Court of Appeals. And I had to show my displeasure. And I don't know if that was a move because they did not like me to handle the case so that I would unload the case to another. But as I said, it is a razón de mi vida.
Thank you. No, more
Thank you.
power. We've been speaking with Philippine Ombudsman Conchita Carpio-Morales, and your questions, your comments. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.